Welcome, humans. It is I, Queen Melodis. There's been a lot of videos lately about racing games and the racing game community, from people like Gamer Alex, DustinEden, Roflwaffle, and so on. And they talk about the community's often conflicting standards and how it's difficult to please a community that's so diverse and yet kinda niche. With arcade races and simulation titles lumped into the same category, it makes sense that there would be different standards from different people. So it's hard for devs to listen to the fans even if they should. So this video is kind of a case study of a niche within a niche, the sci-fi racing games. Specifically the anti-gravity ones, mostly with hovering crafts, but they still restrict you to moving left, right, forwards and backwards rather than having the full range of motion like a plane or a spaceship. We're going to look at what the community is like in the context of the history of the genre, primarily dominated by two of its biggest franchises. So, hey, Wipeout's pretty good, right? And hey, F-Zero, that's pretty good too, right? Wait, what's that? Wipeout fans, why are you calling F-Zero too simple, imprecise and accessible, and not a real hardcore game with physics? F-Zero fans, why are you calling Wipeout slow, boring, too floaty, not precise enough? And what's with the relentless criticism of games in the same vein, like Roll Cage, Redout and Extreme G? What is going on here, and why is the community so divided? Where does this all come from? Well, the first racing games were of course limited to the technology of the time, with various different forms like top-down, isometric, and most relevant of all, the pseudo-3D that came in games such as Pole Position and Outrun, in which sprites increase in size as they get deemed to be closer to the camera, using some very clever mathematical and programming techniques. See Power Drift as an interesting example. And then you get the so-called Mode 7 technique, which basically applies a perspective transformation on the background layer so it looks like the floor, and becomes a really convincing 3D-like effect, with the whole layer rotating smoothly as the player turns. F-Zero was the first racing game to use this feature on the SNES, being a launch title for the console, and from there, everything changed. F-Zero was fast, innovative and fun with a high difficulty and punishing mechanics. You have limited health in which you restore in energy recovery zones, but you can easily bump into the other racers, sending you into a pinball mode, bouncing off walls left and right. You get a booster every lap instead of having power-ups like in Mario Kart, so you have to rely on your own piloting skill to win. And it was great. It sold really well. And a few years later, we would get full 3D, starting with games like Vet and Race Drive-In on PC and arcade before coming to home console with the 5th generation, the PlayStation Saturn and later the N64. In the UK, the PlayStation launched with a game called Wipeout, with a capital E and apostrophe after the E and 2 after the T, which has nothing to do with the real-life obstacle-based game show, and I'm sick of that showing up on search results when I'm clearly looking for the game. And now both of the major sci-fi racing franchises exist. Wipeout was marketed as a disruptive force in the racing game market, as something not like your average Mario Kart or Ridge Racer or F-Zero, but darker, grittier, and more intense. It's why that infamous advert existed, and why it used music that comes from and sounds like the British underground rave scene. Wipeout is very methodical, requiring you to learn not only the racing line like in F-Zero, but also where all the speed pads on the track are. There are speed classes, meaning you can start off by playing with the slower class to get the hang of it, and then graduate to the higher speed class. Tracks are narrower, and have a lot of ups and downs, with the physics designed such that these bumps and jumps cause the craft to bounce and wobble in the air and become unstable, which is something you have to manage. Wipeout 1 did not have health, but did have weapons which you could use to protect yourself or slow down others, and they would be picked up like the item boxes in Mario Kart. Whereas F-Zero had bright colours and fun melodies, Wipeout has a style very different. Darker colours, yes, but a visual theme of slick corporate futurism with the Designers Republic, helping on designs for company logos and UI. But still gritty, not Dystopian, but far from utopian. With music from and inspired by the techno and rave scenes in the UK, it gives off an intense vibe. A little while later, F-Zero X came out for the N64, and Wipeout got its PS1 sequels of 2097 and Whip 3 Out, and the N64 spin-off, Wipeout 64. Now they were competitors, enemies in the bid for the attention of consumers and gamers. They developed their own fan bases, as they are on separate consoles, and many people did not have both. Wipeout on the N64 is the exception, being an interesting fusion, pun not intended, of the original Wipeout and 2097, using ships that look like the 2097 ones, tracks that are essentially mirrored and repainted versions of the original tracks, and a different physics system, which basically had instant turning instead of gradual. Either way, now they can be directly compared, Wipeout 64 to the other Wipeouts and to F-Zero X. Both fans often saw it as inferior, too similar to the other series, but not close enough to what they like. A distinct rivalry begins to emerge. F-Zero X goes in a different direction with its theme, adopting a heavy metal style of soundtrack and a shouty announcer, alongside peak 90s character designs for 30 unique characters and ships, each with their own lore and handling characteristics. Instead of being given a boost each lap, from the start of lap 2 you can expend your health bar to boost forward, and then visit the repair strips littered around the track to heal back up. Winning requires good management of boost and taking risks. The tracks are very wide most of the time to accommodate the 30 pilots, and to keep the frame rate high, sacrifices were made to all kinds of detail, meaning tracks don't have much scenery and the vehicles are very low poly, so it is a little harder to get a sense of atmosphere from each location. But the game is silky smooth at 60 FPS and a lot of fun, so it's hard to complain. Wipeout 2097 goes a little further with the grittiness, with a lot of dark tracks, claustrophobic tunnels and stormy nights. There's more speed classes too, with a much higher top speed and Phantom class, requiring absolute precision, though the physics is a little more forgiving, making the overall experience a little more accessible. The ship has a health bar now too, and can take damage from walls and weapons. Whip 3 Out lets off on the edginess, going for a slightly slicker feel with its own in-universe corporate mascot. Critics at the time thought it didn't innovate enough, but the change in style and handling gives it its own distinct identity in comparison to the prior two games. Far from being just the same over again, Whip 3 Out refines what's there and implements the somewhat controversial hyperthrust system, where you sacrifice energy to go much faster, which seems somewhat familiar. Whip 3 Out starts off slow but gets very fast as you get to the faster speed classes, although unfortunately, something I've noticed is that when someone is trying to get footage from Wipeout games, but especially this one, for their videos they'll often just cherry-pick the slowest ship, which is Fizar, and the slowest class, which is Vector, and play it at the same track, Porto Cora, which is the least interesting one of the lot, and then people in the comments will say it looks really slow. Thinking about that "this game sucks" versus "this game kicks ass" gif set. And I just think, come on, just play through it a bit and unlock something a bit more representative. I think this phenomenon, and what we'll see later, mirrors something that was described in DustinEden's video, and that is the idea of toxic negativity and spiteful positivity. A big part of that phenomenon is cherry picking. For example, someone might pick a single moment within a game that makes it look worse than it is, and show that off, proclaiming the game is not good because of that moment. I feel like Fizar on Vector at Porto Cora is that oft cherry-picked moment. And there are moments on some of the tracks in F-Zero where it looks like you're somewhat out of control, such as the last corner on the Green Plant intersection track in F-Zero GX, where you can get flung off the track, and then you could cherry-pick that and say the game is not good, because it feels like you have no control. Or perhaps you could cherry-pick some of the AX tracks, the F-Zero AX tracks in the AX Cup, and take a video of that without boosting and say that the game has really wide tracks that are boring. And that's just because the AX tracks were wider to accommodate for the arcade cabinet, to make it a bit more accessible and to utilize the the controls that they had on the arcade cabinet itself. And we're going to see how this rivalry develops as time went on. On the next generation of consoles, we see Wipeout Fusion and then F-Zero GX. Wipeout Fusion came at a time of strife within the developers' careers. Psygnosis, the original devs, were being brought in closer to Sony Computer Entertainment. People were being shuffled around and made redundant all over, and then the development team became renamed to SCE Studio Liverpool. And may I just say one thing? On the Wikipedia page for Wipeout Fusion, it says that designer Colin Berry became disillusioned after Fusion released because it was trying to be like F-Zero GX, from his words in a later Eurogamer interview about Wipeout Pure, an article which stokes that rivalry between the two franchises. But GX had not been released until a year after Fusion, so either he means X, or something weird is going on here. Most likely Fusion was inspired more by pod racing from Star Wars, especially considering the first track's sandy open section. Anyway, Fusion had some pretty rough development. According to interviews in the book Wipeout Futurism, Fusion almost got not only canned, but the whole studio shut down. The devs struggled with the PS2's dev kit and hardware, and Wipeout 3 had been mostly made in Leeds rather than Liverpool, meaning it had been a long time since they had actually worked on a Wipeout game. Many key figures left or were made redundant in this time, such as those that left to form the studio named Curly Monsters, which would develop N-Gen Racing and Quantum Redshift, and nothing else. But it left the Fusion team with a difficult job to do, and a struggle to find a focus and a clear vision. Not only that, but the Designers Republic that worked with them since the first game and helped them make it so aesthetically unique left as well after Sony gave them a terrible offer. Now, I still like Fusion, but there's no denying it was very unlike the previous trilogy and perhaps not as cohesive and tight as those first three games. And staff members kept leaving, and the game ended up not being what the people working on it really wanted it to be, although still in my opinion very good. The tracks have this magnetic effect to them which I don't enjoy quite as much, but you do get some decent relaxation / payoff moments, such as loops, which make the tracks rather memorable. The game is darker in tone, with a more negative view on the corporate futurism, with the in-game companies doing some pretty shady and heinous things. Like, if you read up on the whole lore with the Overtel Corporation, and Tigron and Kyrex and G-Tech, gosh. The handling is a little floatier than previous games, where the ship will drift wide on turns if you're not careful, but like with any distinct handling style, it's one you can't just approach with the same mindset as the games you know. You can make it through a lap without touching a wall at all, it just comes down to skill. On the other side of the field, F-Zero GX was outsourced to Sega, and they did a bang-up job creating a game with a great timeless look and some incredibly fun gameplay. Releasing on the GameCube, however, was just one of those inevitabilities that would limit its sales because it just wasn't as popular a console as the PlayStation 2 was. And now we can see where some more of that rivalry starts to come from. When one game series has an off day, the fans of the other bring out spite towards them. In this toxic negativity, spiteful positivity sense, Wipeout and F-Zero are two very different sides of the same AG racing coin, and they started out with very different styles. F-Zero X was fast and tight with wider tracks, though they could get very narrow at times, taking loops, going on pipes, in tubes, at very fast speeds, where you sacrifice your life energy for a speed boost. Instead of weapons, ships could melee combat each other with sides and spin attacks. Wipeout 1 was by no means slow, especially on the Rapier class, but ships were heavier. They had this heavy feel to them, where a loss of momentum by hitting a wall or getting hit by a weapon could be very costly, and it would take a while to get back up to the speed. The tracks were designed in a more realistic fashion, where they follow the curvature of the terrain and are designed like Formula 1 tracks, kind of. Now, when not boosting, F-Zero's ships can feel a little bit slow. Wipeout 2097's new Phantom class and ship health made the game faster and more dangerous. Wipeout 3's hyperthrust was indeed somewhat reminiscent of F-Zero X, and there were fans of the Nintendo franchise that felt like the Psygnosis team were kind of beginning to tread on their turf a bit. Many Wipeout fans, on the other hand, felt that the grittier and more grounded, ironically, portrayal of the future in Wipeout compared to the bright colours and wacky characters of F-Zero meant that it was a less childish game. Wipeout's heavy ships have this feeling of being based on a realistic kind of physics and aerodynamics, whereas many AG racing games including F-Zero go for a side shifting or strafing mechanics on the shoulder buttons. Wipeout has its distinctive air brakes. Not only do they slow the craft down slightly, but they provide a little bit of rotation of the rear end, rotating the craft about a point close to the front, providing a very different way to rotate the ship in comparison to regular turning, like McLaren's single rear brake pedal that they had in F1 in 1997. Wipeout's ships feel like they truly float above the ground. Bumps cause them to oscillate up and down before settling at a point above the ground, and yet the controls are tight and responsive, letting you control the craft as an extension of your body. The skill ceiling is very high. F-Zero has crafts a little more sunk down onto the floor. The body of the craft will pitch and roll following the track, and will take loops and go upside down no problem. However, there comes a specific point where the downward force is not enough, and the ship will let go of the track flying free. As such, the crafts have a sense of grippiness that you might see on an open wheel race car, and like those cars, there comes a point where that grippiness lets go and the craft begins to slide. This is where you have to use the analog stick, which the N64 had, and which did come to the PlayStation 2 years after its release, and so was not on the original Wipeout, and its very precise movement to get just the right angle if you wanted to avoid drifts. You could also use the side attack to quickly push the craft to the left and right. This has a very high skill ceiling as well. If you're an expert at one of these games, and you get invited to play the other one, for the first time you might struggle. The controls are really different, and considering that rivalry, it gives the player a bit of a preconceived bias against the competitor, and so an F-Zero player looks at Wipeout and calls it slow and loose, like piloting on ice, with weapons like Mario Kart removing skill, and a Wipeout player looks at F-Zero and calls it unrealistic and inconsistent, where ships just lose grip wherever they feel like it. But of course, if each person tried the other game properly with an open mind and managed to master it, they'd see that both are great in their own way. And so we get to Wipeout Fusion. Instead of its signature vertically floaty but horizontally tight controls at a more modest speed around grounded circuits, we now receive ships that hug the floor tightly and yet slide far more than before, with tracks that take loops and big jumps and corkscrews. Though the tracks are still fairly narrow, albeit not as wide as F-Zero X and GX in a lot of cases, and with very tight corners, there are exceptions. Don't cherry pick. Now this means that if you are good at the game, you'll likely hit a lot of walls. Hitting walls, of course, costs health, and a lot of new players might end up just riding the walls and having to go into the pit lane every lap. But you can play the game right and aim for perfect laps and minimal collisions most of the time. The cave sections are a little ridiculous sometimes, but that's neither here nor there. If you have enough skill, you can play Wipeout Fusion perfectly. Each ship has different stats like before, though there is, like in Wipeout 3, a progression of the ships getting arguably better as you unlock more, whereas in F-Zero the ships are at least supposed to be fairly balanced. Although in neither series are the ships ever truly balanced, especially when it comes to the meta, but they do try, though instead of the usual Wipeout speed classes, you spend points earned to upgrade the ships. Once they're fully upgraded, they're kinda similar. Like F-Zero in 2097, Fusion has named pilots with their own fancy faces and personalities. Fusion was given a hard time when it came out, and still is, but I like most of it still. The point stands, however, that it became a lot more similar to F-Zero, and that struck a nerve with people on both fandoms, stoking the rivalry further. F-Zero GX is an incredible game. 1 year later than Fusion, and it was a more polished experience. It looked brighter and more colourful, with a nearly timeless style during gameplay. Handling is similar in concept to X, but different in execution. Once again, if you try to push the analog stick all the way and too fast, for a lot of crafts, it will most likely begin to slide, which with enough skill can be utilised to go even faster. There are lots of intentional and unintentional movement techs, making it more similar to a fighting game, and different ships can utilise different ones. Instead of the realistic physics-based handling of Wipeout, it goes for an insanely arcade system, with yet again a very high skill ceiling. Once again, if you're not very good, it can feel like the physics are inconsistent. Sometimes the ships will decide to turn, and sometimes they'll decide to slide. Of course, it's not actually inconsistent, but minuscule changes in the ship's speed and the analog stick's position can change the way the craft behaves. And with a tiny little analog stick with admittedly great tracking, and the delay that comes from a monitor that's not a CRT, the type which was beginning to be phased out when GX arrived, it can be very difficult to play at a decent level. But it was on the GameCube, a system which sold poorly. The PlayStation 2 had like 7 times the number of sales, and GX sold poorly even for that. And I don't really know why. Perhaps people thought it was too hard and didn't buy it. Perhaps people just didn't like racing games that weren't Mario Kart. Or perhaps the marketing just messed up somehow. 3 years after Fusion, Wipeout got Pure and then later Pulse. Both incredible handheld games for the PSP that build upon, but change the formula with a different handling model. Instead of a pit lane, you can absorb weapons to gain energy back. You also now have movement techs like barrel rolls and side shifts. Barrel rolls which provide you with a boost upon landing but cost shield energy, and the side shifts shift you to the side. So it is less purely hard physics based, slightly more colourful and a little bit less gritty. They're great games, but I do object a little bit to the weapon absorption mechanic. The person in first will get all of the normal weapons from weapon pads, but only the defensive ones are actually useful in that situation. So they absorb all of the rest, regaining energy that had been lost when being hit by weapons of others or walls. And they don't lose any speed, which taking the pit lane would require you to do. And that makes for a bit of a positive feedback loop. Those in the pack need all weapons to stay competitive, so absorbing is more risky, and so their shield energy will continually decrease as they are hit, but the leader can keep regaining shield and is less at risk. Meanwhile, pit lanes slow the leader down. Regaining shield is something that stops them from pulling away. But that's just my view. Pure was given a faux remaster with new physics in HD, and then some Pulse tracks were brought over too. Then we got 2048, which I haven't played because I never owned a Vita, and then the studio shut down. But then the Omega Collection came out in 2017, which was a remaster of 2048 and HD Fury, which I've also not played because I didn't own a PS4. Wipeout was dead when Studio Liverpool closed after 2048 came out in 2012. F-Zero was dead just a few years after GX, after some GBA games came out. Neither franchise looks like it's really coming back. F-Zero fans had hope that one would come for the Wii, and then the Wii U, but it's slowly declining. 99 is an interesting one, but it's not really a full sequel, much like the Omega Collection isn't a full sequel of Wipeout. For 8 years, F-Zero fans saw new Wipeout games while their franchise had none, sparking a resentment. Why do they get cool stuff, but not us? Our games are better than theirs. And then Wipeout stopped. Fans were given a big old slap in the face when Studio Liverpool was shut down. No longer was there hope for the franchise. Fans were then given a big old slap in the face again with Wipeout Rush, or Merge, as it was once called, a mobile game which had merging, and the gameplay was clicking on buttons. Ouch. Each franchise was a rival to the other. While there were other anti-gravity racing games in existence at the time, and have been since, such as Roll Cage, and Quantum Redshift, and Extreme G, nothing became a big franchise, or has had the same level of success as either of these two. They became sort of a dichotomy. Every AG racer since was meant to be categorized as either a Wipeout-like or F-Zero-like, and it really hurt the discourse surrounding the quality of these games. When the only points of comparison are two wildly different game franchises, the fanbase becomes inward, insular, almost toxic. F-Zero fans looked to new AG racers and saw ones that were more similar to Wipeout and just thought, another one? Wipeout fans looked at ones that were like F-Zero and they just thought, no thanks. Two different echo chambers, two different fan bases, two different communities. Viewpoints are confirmed and remained unchallenged. For fans of both series, neither community seems particularly friendly. But we're reaching an age where lots of indie games in this genre are really starting to come out. We have Ballistic NG, Redout, Fast, Aero GPX, XF, Extreme Formula, Star Racer, to name just a few. We have to let them stand on their own. We can't just compare them to whichever franchise they were closest to, because these are great games in their own right. I've played many of these over the years and I'll give a brief overview. Ballistic NG is a tribute to the PS1 Wipeouts in terms of aesthetic and physics, although there is a separate 2280 physics mode, which emulates the slightly more HD pulse kind of physics that then turns into that kind of game. It is absolutely spectacular, and I have over 150 hours in it just playing through the campaigns, and then the modded campaigns, and then just doing races. I've not even touched online yet. Grip is another amazing game, a modern revival of Roll Cage with floating cars as an option, as well as the cars with big wheels. Truly fun gameplay and intricate tracks. It's a great time all round. Redout is harder to describe. It's an AG racer where the ships hug the floor, but you have to pitch the craft up and down with the track or you'll red out and slow down, and you have to strafe for the corners. It's blisteringly fast and very difficult, and the ships handle somewhat like the Wipeout Fusion ones, which is not a criticism. The first time I tried it, it wasn't quite to my taste, and the aesthetics did bug me a little bit, but I'll happily give it another go with an open mind someday. Fast, with the Fast Racing, Fast Neo, Fast RMX and now Fast Fusion, is a series only on the Nintendo consoles after the Wii, and it does what it says on the tin. It's fast. It's really fast. It has a fun polarity switching mechanic, like a Karuga but for boosting. The piloting physics are pretty fun. The track designs are a little poor on the square side, but overall I do enjoy my time with it. I used to enjoy Quantum Rush quite a lot a decade ago, and maybe it's still good, and I should revisit it. Aero GPX is a game I don't have, but it looks like a modernised version of F-Zero X, specifically stating in its Kickstarter that it was inspired by the F-Zero games, although it has an extra flying feature and it's an odd spinning one, and instead of a single health and boost bar, it has them separate. I approach it with trepidation, but once I have money, I might try it. XF Extreme Formula is a fun game, perhaps a little too on the nose with its F-Zero GX inspiration, but it is very fast and a bit of fun, although I've only played the demo. Star Racer is more like the F-Zero games, which are 2D, but made 3D, which has a lot of promise. Super Pilot is like F-Zero X with a track editor, which has a lot of unrealised potential. There's a lot of Wipeout influenced games which ended up dying. Slipstream GX was cancelled. Formula Fusion eventually became Pacer, which was pretty much dead on arrival, and 2 years ago they decided to release something called Pacer Classic, which looks exactly the same as Pacer, except it's not on Steam and you have to buy it separately, and there's like, is it like NFT things? I don't even, genuinely, the amount of stuff going on with that whole Formula Fusion Pacer debacle deserves its own video, and it's not one I can make because I have no idea what's going on. And I'm sure there are plenty more games that I don't even know about and are at least interesting. A lot of F-Zero alikes have come out in the past few years, whereas the Wipeout alikes were more of a 2012 to 2017 thing. Each time these eras change, fans look at them and think, it's not the same, and then dismiss it or move on. I can't even talk about these anti-gravity games without comparing them to one of the two franchises. I literally just did that. It's so annoying. Imagine if every car game was compared to a constructed dichotomy of Gran Turismo versus Need for Speed. Oh, this game is more like Gran Turismo, this game is more like Need for Speed. Why can't it stand on its own? F-Zero fans will see either X or GX as perfect, and anything that diverges a little bit and tries to find its own identity is almost bad, not good, it's not the same, wrong. Guess I'll just play my old game again? Hundreds of Wipeout fans will come into the Ballistic NG Discord server and ask for where the Wipeout ports are so they can play the same game again instead of trying something new. It became a meme in the server, it happened so much. Everything is just compared to what exists. We march forward in time with our eyes glued backwards to the past instead of to what is in front of us. It's such an insular community, with a lot of elitists and sweats and gatekeepers and fanboys so loyal that they'll accept nothing but what they already know. The truth is that these games have been reduced from incredibly popular in the classic era to just a niche, like shmups, which also contains a lot of elitists and gatekeepers, and the vast majority of AG racing content is made out of pure passion. Non-constructive critique and elitism gets you nowhere. Why demonize people just for liking a game series? We could be a single community of dedicated fans who love a particular genre and show respect to those who have the skills and passion to create something new within it. Or we could stay divided as multiple communities who won't support each other, bringing each other down and wallowing in despair, proclaiming the end of their favourite genre, calling everything else slop, and not trying to be open to what's a little bit different. I'm not telling you that you have to like a game that you just can't gel with, but that doesn't make it bad. I'm tired of negativity and spite. This doesn't mean you have to like something you don't like, but an open mind can't hurt. These are art pieces, the majority of which are harmless, made with a ton of effort, and meant to be enjoyed. You can play what you want, and I won't judge you for it, but even if specific games are not good, I'm going to try and find fun in them. And I'm going to try and find fun in this genre. That's Queen Melodis, signing out.